either on target or above target. For example, personal moments were slightly below target, and my colleagues will give details later. Things like subsidies and social benefits were slightly higher, and again, the details of that will be provided later on by Budget Office. But what I need to say here is that those subsidies that are critical, transfers and critical, especially to the social sector, those are the ones where we've spent even more than what we had budgeted for. So things like money granted for free education in high school, we have not overspent, we have not underspent. Transfer, school grants, the money that we give to schools to buy chalk and stuff like that, on target. Social cash transfer, either on target or even slightly above. So all these critical social cash transfers, this time around, they've benefited. We've avoided the habit of the past of diverting money from the poorest and giving to those who are better off. So we've made sure that the social sector is well-funded, issues of health well-funded. Issues of CDF, Constituency Development Fund, well-funded without exception, and Budget Office will give us details on that. Let me now go to the dates. The next slide is just the graphics of what I've just discussed, so I'll not say anything further on that. On the debt position, at the end of September 2022, for which data is available, central government external debt increased by 2.5% to 13.36 billion kwacha from 13.04 billion, sorry, these are in dollars, from December 2021. Now, so you see that there's been a marginal increase in external debt. The question is why? First of all, as we have always explained, there were some projects that were being financed by debt financing or by borrowing. These projects were there even when this government came into office. Some of them were at advanced stage, or some of them it was felt that if we were to stop those loans continuing, and therefore the project being abandoned, there was more to lose than continuing to borrow a little bit more so that such projects are completed, because some of them are necessary. They are necessary for the country. Of course, many other projects which were deemed to be financed by borrowing, new borrowing, as we told the nation sometime last year, December 2021. These were totally cancelled. We said out. The ones that remained are the ones that we considered to be critical, and therefore were to allow some borrowing to take place. And also I need to mention that as part of the program that we have with the IMF, even after debt restructuring, the amount of debt that we are supposed to pay, given the resources that we have, would have been hard, it would have been painful. It would have meant that, yes, we continue to service the debt, but the amount of money remaining to provide for education, to provide for health, provide for basic infrastructure, that money would have been little. In other words, resumption of debt service would have inflicted a lot of pain on the citizens, even after debt restructuring, especially the citizens who are the poorest of the poor. Therefore, part of the IMF program, part of our program with the IMF, was to get money from them so that as we resume debt service, we don't forget about education, we don't forget about health, we don't forget about basic infrastructure, we don't forget about retirees. So to cushion the effects of the poorest of the poor as you resume debt service that has been scaled down, that has been reduced. But the good news is that this debt from the multilateral institutions, which are the IMF, World Bank, and others, this is very concessional. This money to cushion the effects of the poorest of the poor is very concessional, meaning the interest rate, sometimes it is zero, sometimes it's as low as just under 1%. As opposed to the loans that we were getting before, which were paying 8%, 10%, and so forth. This is very cheap money and payable in most cases either on a 15, 20, or 30-year period with a grace period of some 5 years or 10 years, I think 5 years. So this is like a situation whereby a company is in trouble, it is on the threat of being wound down or dissolved or closed. Then the banker comes in and says, my friend, we believe your company can be served. If you change your operations in this way, this way, this way, this company can be changed. So we'll give you extra money so that as you make those changes, you have a new lease of life. So this is exactly the same logic that we're talking about here. So all these facts, continuation of the ongoing projects that were deemed to be important, and providing a cushion to the poorest of the poor as we resume debt service. These are the factors that have led to the modest increase in debt, external debt. As far as some of the domestic debt is concerned, domestic debt on treasury bills and government securities, that went up by 9%. Arrears on fuel and electricity, we've been dismantling these slowly, so those have come down and will continue to dismantle them as we go in 2023 and beyond. The next section, the monetary sector, and there are 2 points I want to raise here, and the bank governor, deputy governor, is going to provide more details. On the inflation, remember last year, 2022, we started with a rate of inflation of 15.1%. By the end of the year, it was just under 10%. So we've been doing very well as far as inflation is concerned. I know the talk around is that cost of living is going up, cost of things is up. Yes, I do agree. The cost of items is high, but please remember this. The cost of most items were already high when this government got into office. They were already high. And at the time, in spite of being high, they were continuing to rise even faster. That's what faster, or this is what higher inflation meant. The higher inflation that we found at 23%. So items were already high in prices, but that was not the end. The prices continued to rise faster. The achievement that is there is that Yes, those high prices that we found, but the change now is that the increase have slowed down from 15.1% at the beginning of 2022 now to just under 10%. And going forward, of course, the objective is to lower the rate of inflation even further. The rate of inflation, meaning the speed at which prices are increasing. So by lowering inflation, all we are saying that the speed or the pace at which prices are increasing, we need to lower those further from the current level of 9.9% to the target set for the Bank of Zambia to between 6 and 8. I also need to say something here. The question that many people ask themselves is, yes, inflation is coming down, but the cost of living is still high. So how do we get to a more affordable cost of living? The answer to that, contrary to many people's expectations, because people are always saying prices must come down, prices must come down. Yes, some prices will come down, especially those which are related to the exchange rate. Because if the kwacha stabilizes or becomes stronger, imported items, of course, the price will come down. But for the majority of the items, if you say prices of chickens must come down, basically you're telling the farmer, go and lower your price of chickens. You're telling the farmer, lower the price of your cabbage. You're telling the manufacturer, lower the price of your item. In certain few cases, that will happen. But as a general trend, that will not happen because you tell the farmers lower their prices, you are basically saying to them, close shop. Because how do they survive? So that's not the way in which the cost of living is going to improve for most of us. Not via that route. The way the improvement will come is through improved incomes. Improved incomes. Because if the cost of the item is like that, and it's just growing slightly, but your income levels are rising faster, your salaries or something like that are rising faster, profits are rising faster, that of course means that your affordability to purchase these items is going to improve. So the expectation should not be about a general decline in the prices of goods, because then you make the situation worse by companies closing, farmers closing. Rather, the improvement is going to come about through salaries, profits increasing. That, of course, takes a bit of time, but it will happen. It will happen because for the government workers, as long as we always give a salary increment that is slightly higher than inflation, it means that your affordability of commodities is going to improve. Of course, our desire is to even pay more and more, but to do so, this brings us to the issue of growth. We need to make sure that we encourage companies to produce more, because salaries come from companies. We need to have new investments, because even for that person, the individual who has no job, even a small increase of 5 kwacha for any item, for them it becomes very hard because they have no money, they have no income. But if that individual now gets into a regular income, you are already improving the cost of living. You are already improving the ability to afford items, because previously the income was zero. Now the income is something. Therefore, they are able to purchase something from the market. This is why you hear this government talking about making the costs of doing business to be low. I know there are challenges, and we'll talk about that. Reducing corruption, licenses being issued on time, things like that. Creating incentives in the mining sector, so that creating incentives in the agriculture sector, creating incentives in the manufacturing sector, so that that person out there who has no income now is going to have an income, and that by itself becomes something that is very important for them to be able to afford something, from affording nothing to affording something. So the issue, therefore, of saying how is the cost of living going to be affordable, it comes about by improvement in salaries. It comes about by creating conditions that will allow new people to be employed, because then they will have something to be able to afford. On the exchange rate, of course, we have done very well. We found the exchange rate at about 22. Then our kwacha became a very good performer at 15 kwacha, 15.7. Now it has corrected itself to about 18. I still think that this is within the realm of stability. I've always said over and over, stability in the exchange rate does not mean that the exchange rate will be fixed. It will be bumping itself up and down, but the violent changes in the exchange rate that we saw before, we believe it is highly unlikely that we'll see that again. But I also want to say something about the exchange rate. The exchange rate is a double-edged sword. It is a double-edged sword. In the sense that for most of us who are consuming imported items, any item that is imported, of course we want the exchange rate to be as powerful as possible. But let's not forget that exchange rate is also very important for those of our colleagues in the economy who are responsible for bringing dollars in the country. The dollars that we need to import the item that we consume. For them to bring those dollars in the country, the exchange rate is very important. Very, very important. To give you an example, at the time when the dollar was something like 1920, I can tell you that there was a lot of business between Zambia and Congo. There was a lot of business. Why? Because for every dollar that a Zambian trader earned in Congo DRC, when they translated it into kwacha, they found that they were able to break even. They found that they were able to make money. So if the exchange rate of the dollar becomes too strong, all that business of people exporting items to Congo DRC vanishes away. I'll tell you an interesting story. My own constituency, Liowa, where I came from yesterday. 10 years ago, if you went around the villages, you find a lot of catfish. Catfish. They were all over. Then at some point, you could hardly see any catfish in Liowa. Why? Because for the villagers there, it was more profitable not to sell the catfish to to their own people, but to export it to Congo. So they were passing through in here in Lusaka with the smoked catfish to take to Congo. When the exchange rate was 15, most of them stopped and said, we are no longer making profits. When we consider how much we buy the fish locally, the transportation, our upkeep there at Kasumbalesa, we are no longer making money. So they stopped. Okay, they stopped. But when the exchange rate is slightly better than when it is now, the trade is resumption. People are taking boxes once again to Kasumbalesa. So, yes, the exchange rate needs to be stable, but let's avoid the temptation of killing those who are exporting to DRC, Angola, and other places because we want to consume cheap imported items. We need to strike that balance. The outlook for 2023, as we said in the budget, for 2023, we want growth to reach 4%. We also want the inflation to come down further, 6 to 8%, meaning that these increments in prices we complain about, that speed should come down further. Then, of course, we want to maintain international reserves, above 3 months of imports. We want to collect more taxes. We want to borrow less so that the private sector can borrow. So these are the general things that we want to see in 2023. All these things that I'm talking about in terms of what we want to see will depend on the number of things, some of which we are already doing. The first one is debt restructuring. Colleagues, sometimes we forget that, in fact, Zambia is under debt stress. It is under debt stress. We are just not feeling it because of that debt standstill that I'm talking about. We are not servicing what we owe. But it cannot be like that forever and ever because the people that we borrowed money, they expect to be paid. This is why, when this government came into office, we said we want to tackle this problem. We will tackle it by speaking to the creditors so that they recognize that what we owe now is unaffordable. We cannot pay it. So we must agree on how we can restructure the debt, meaning how can they somehow reduce what we owe so that once we agree with that, then we resume the debt servicing payment. And to do so, we needed to work with the creditors themselves to be able to talk to the creditors. We needed the support of the multilateral institutions, the World Bank and the IMF. Remember, they're the ones who are giving us money so that as we resume the debt service, other expenditures don't come to a standstill. So this is how we agreed with the IMF for them to support this program, the IMF program that we ourselves designed. Where are we on this? I want to say that as Zambia, we have done our part. We have done our part on whatever is needed that we agreed with to deliver this debt service. We've done our part. What we are waiting for now are those who promised us that if we did this and this and this, they will deliver debt restructuring. That's what we're waiting for. As for us, we've done our part, totally and on time. So therefore, of course, it is our plea once again, especially the official creditors, it is our plea once again, which we have said over and over again, we have delivered on our side. Can we also finally get the debt relief one way or another so that we have a chance, of attracting serious investment to our country, and then the economy will grow, so that we become part of the global economic scene, answering the issues of us contributing to this world economy. So we are waiting to hear what progress they are making to deliver the debt relief. That is very important, and we hope it can happen soon rather than later. Apart from that, I think in the 2023 budget, we talked about the fact that we have high expectations out of agriculture, we have high expectations out of tourism, and in agriculture, we said we are going to open up more spaces because we have two-pronged approach to agriculture. Continuing to support our small-scale farmers so that they are more productive, that is one route. But the other route, for those who have the muscle, the corporate world, who are able to farm large tracts of land without government support other than infrastructure, we are opening up space for them, we are opening up incentives for them, so that we take advantage of this food shortage that is there because of the war in Ukraine, and produce big quantities for exports, either as raw materials or as processed foods. So we will be making a roadshow. We'll be making a roadshow with the Minister of Agriculture to world-class investors, whether it is in Brazil, whether it's in Australia, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in Zambia. We've opened up the space, we've given you the road, we've given you electricity. Come and produce and export to the rest of the world. So that program is on this year. Similarly, on tourism, again, issue of providing infrastructure, because it's not enough to have wildlife. You need infrastructure for investors in lodges and hotels to be able to reach those places, put hotels up in lodges, and this is what we are going to do in 2023. Colleagues, there's the issue of mining. We all know that this is the locomotive, or this is the engine of the growth of this country. We've said before, and our target is to reach 3 million tons in the next decade. This is why we created the incentives for new investments in mining. And I'm happy that already there are some positive things that have happened. You know that right now the biggest nickel mine in Africa is being constructed on the northwestern province, the biggest nickel mine in Africa. The expansion of the Kansanshi mine in Solwezi that is taking place. A few weeks ago, you heard that there's going to be a new investment in Rwambe mine. Rwambe mine is near Chirilabombo there. And just yesterday, there was news that there's another group of people who are looking at another mine, separate from Rwambe, another mine near Chirilabombo. So I'm very confident that the incentives that we provide in the mine sector are yielding results. But we still have the challenges of the old mines, that is KCM and Mopani copper mines. We are not sleeping. We are not sleeping to try and resolve these two mining issues. Once again, I want to appeal for a bit more patience. The reason why those two mines today are where they are, non-performing, is because of poor decisions that were made. Hasty decisions in an unfriendly environment. That's why those two mines ended up where they are today. So in reviving them, we want to make sure that the mistakes of hastiness, the mistakes of choosing the wrong investor who comes in and just gives you headaches and headaches and headaches, we want to make sure that those mistakes are not being repeated. Unfortunately, to get into that process, the credible investors who want to look at this, they ask you a lot of questions. They want to check this and that. It's not like buying a shirt. These are assets where hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars will be poured in to bring those mines to something that we'll all be proud of. So the process is a little bit long, but we are almost getting there. And the good news is that some of the people who are looking at these assets, with the possibility of investing into them, they are some of the best mining companies in the world. So I am therefore confident that once we get there, the people of the Copper Belt, the people of Zambia, will say to this government, well done, because the result will show for itself that the sector is going to run. So that's where we are with the mining sector in terms of bringing back growth and jobs. I also want to say something about public-private partnership. We are close to public-private partnership is a situation whereby you recognize that as government you don't have enough money to do all the public infrastructure. So in the line of what other countries have done, you invite the private sector to say, do this power station, do this road, do this dam. It is not government that is going to pay you. It is the users of this infrastructure who are going to pay you. So already, as you know, we signed off the Chingola to Kasumbalesa Road. Chingola to Kasumbalesa Road, we have already signed it off on a PPP, and immediately after the rain season, construction starts. That is from Chingola to Kasumbalesa, and then the last 3 kilometers towards Kasumbalesa, it will be double lane. So that is already out of the way. We are hopefully concluding very soon on the Lusaka to Ndola dual carriageway. I'm confident that after the rain season, the Lusaka to Ndola dual carriageway, the work for that will start. It will take about 3 years, hopefully. And of course, as you can imagine, it is jobs all along the way. Labor, suppliers of materials. So that aspect is coming on. And of course, there are other PPP projects on the pipeline, like linkage between Lumana there and Kolwezi in Congo. That is under discussion. Mwenda in Wapula to Kasomeno in Congo, that is also under discussion. So this coming year, I think we should see many of these coming to fruition and work beginning to start and jobs being created in the process. The energy sector, very topical because of the current shortages of electricity. Of course, my colleague, the Minister of Energy, is dealing with that, but what we know as a government for now is that as soon as this Kariba Dam fills up, the generation capacity in the country is more than adequate to provide enough electricity because of the Kafia Gorge Lower. So hopefully, as the engineers tell us, within the next 3 months, if not earlier, the current problem will be down. But of course, other measures the President did indicate are being put in place for mitigation. However, there's something that I also want to tell you. This is that to get the 3 million tons of copper that I spoke about, to get to the 3 million tons of copper that I spoke about. Even the generation capacity that we know is adequate now, once the water comes in, that generation capacity will no longer be enough because these new mines will require electricity. The new mines will require electricity. Therefore, this government, we have agreed that we are going to do something to make sure that electricity is produced in anticipation of the higher demand that will come from more mining. There is a catch, however. There is a catch to this, however. The catch is that the time for imagining that ZESCO alone can produce all the electricity that we need, that time is gone. Okay? That time is gone. Why? Because the demand that is going to come is so much. Secondly, we all know that ZESCO is very heavily indebted. Heavily indebted because I think what year was that, when there was another big shortage of electricity? We imported electricity from Mozambique, from a ship, very expensive. There are huge debts that have remained out of that. Some of the, apart from that, some of the private generators of electricity, when they came in, there was agreement that the price for electricity was going to be higher than what ZESCO sells to us. In other words, what was agreed was that ZESCO would buy electricity expensive, but then sell it cheap to all of us. In other words, ZESCO is losing money on that electricity coming from the private generators. The private generators are saying, look, there's no way we can sell you electricity to ZESCO at the price that you sell yourself to your customers, because then we'll not make money. All I'm saying now is that for us to interest the private investors into electricity, for us to attract private investment into electricity, because ZESCO is incapable to satisfy everything, the price of electricity has to increase. The price of electricity has to increase. If we don't do that, then I'm afraid we are going to have serious shortages of electricity in this country. And the price we are talking about is not a price like from heaven. This is a price that you find in all the neighboring countries, whether it's Botswana, whether it's Namibia. I think South Africa, even South Africa prices are higher than us. That's what we're talking about, not a price out there in heaven. So this is why Cabinet decided that we will allow a gradual increase in the tariff over a 5-year period. Gradual one. Nothing like what most people are fearing, that it will be a very big jump. It will be a very gradual increase over 5 years' time. But that gradual increase is important to give a signal to those who are willing or who want to invest into electricity in Zambia, so that we avoid serious shortage of electricity by the time the new mines are opening up. And I can tell you that there are so many companies lining up like this who are willing to come and invest into electricity in Zambia, provided the price is that which enables them to make profit. So this is where we are. As government, we've decided that there's no other option, there's no other choice. There is no other choice. Doing nothing is not an answer, because it means in the next 5 years or so, we have very serious shortage of electricity. So we don't want to go through that route. Finally, I want to talk about CDF as an instrument of growth and job creation. As I told you, I just came from my constituency yesterday in Liwa. I can tell you that the people out there are very happy and they are busy. Because for the first time since independence, they've never received so much money in rural areas. For them to upgrade their schools from mud and poor to permanent buildings. For them to be able to make desks they themselves in Kalabo there. Not importing desks from South Africa, but in Kalabo, we've got good timber. They're making desks to put in their schools. The traders out there are very happy because they're able to sell cement, they're able to sell iron sheets, they're able to sell window frames. They are very happy. So this CDF that some people want to say is bad or condemn, the reality on the ground is the opposite. People are very happy, and logically so, because money is coming into their pockets. In fact, our problem out there in the rural areas is that we don't have enough builders. So if there are builders here in Lusaka or anywhere else who want to try their luck in Kalabo and Liwa, please go. There are jobs waiting there for you. But I also want to tell you that we are training our own people there. Every year we are training about 80 builders, so that by next year, the people of Liwa themselves, they can build their classrooms, they can build their clinics, the traders can sell cement. So money is there. The money that is not available, colleagues, is money to go and buy fire tenders, money to go and buy inflated, because some colleagues come and say, oh, me, I want to supply helicopters. Me, I want to supply fire tenders. There's no money for that. The money that is there is to address the needs of the poor people, to give them a hospital, to give them schools. If that's the money that you want, it is there, but it's not money for free. It's money that you must work for. That way, you'll be able to make a living. So out there in the rural areas, I can tell you that people are very happy, and anyone who is skilled and can contribute to developing the rural areas, leave Lusaka, live in Dola, go in the rural areas. There's more than enough work there for you. So this is where we are. In conclusion, budget for 2022 was on spot, and now we are pushing very hard in the mining sector, pushing very hard in agriculture, pushing very hard on PPPs so that jobs can be created. I end here and thank you for your attention, and I apologize for the long-windedness, but I thought I needed to explain all this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that address, Honorable Minister. May we just give the Minister a generous round of applause, encourage him as we welcome our next presenter. And this is Mr. Willis Chipango, our Director for Budget. Is just going to give us a bit more detail on what the Minister has been talking about, after which presentation we will go to a presentation from the Bank of Zambia, which will be done by the Deputy Governor, Operations, Dr. Francis Chipimo. After his presentation, then we will close our presentations with one from the Commissioner General of the Zambia Revenue Authority. When that has happened, we will come to the audience with interventions, starting with one from the capital markets, Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants, Policy Monitoring and Research Center, and the Center for Trade Policy and Dialogue. So wait for Mr. Chipango to come round and then we'll proceed into the presentation. So do take note of what is being discussed. When it comes to that point, then you can raise your question or commendation at that point. However, do take note that we do have an audience online that is also participating by listening to us. So, as my colleague is getting ready, I'll check whether Mr. Chipango is ready to proceed.
Yes, we are ready. Is it okay if we speak from here? Just yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kandeta.
Proceed, please. Thank you.
As we are waiting for the presentation to come on, I think my presentation will be quite short in that I will simply focus on a few items and give a bit more detail on those issues. The Minister's presentation has been quite comprehensive and has covered pretty much a lot of the stuff I had wanted to present on. So that is the outline of what we're looking at. We can go to the next slide. Okay. So, revenues and grants, I think as the Honorable Minister has had mentioned, the performance has been on point, and you could see the two bars there. I think I've not seen the projection being so close to the actual in a very long time. So that is the story of our revenues and grants in 2022. The Commissioner General will obviously give details around there as he comes to present. This is, as you may know, despite the fact that we have had challenges with collections on mineral royalty and also a delayed reinstatement of the fuel taxes that was moved from June 30th to September 30th. Some substantial amount of money was lost in that regard, but we still managed to collect revenues to the level that we did. Next slide. So with regard to government spending, government spent a total of about 140 billion kwacha against the budget that we all remember of 172 billion, and this was slightly lower by close to 19%, and mainly due to what the Honorable Minister has already mentioned, the continuation of the external debt service standstill. And you may know, or you may be aware that over 47, close to 47 billion kwacha in external debt was not serviced in 2022. With regard to the implementation strategy for the 2022 budget, must mention that this was anchored mainly on budget credibility, on ensuring budget credibility and budget predictability, and the Honorable Minister has alluded to a lot of areas. I'll just give a few details on some of those. A lot of areas that have indicated that we have indeed been quite credible in our implementation of the 2022 budget. And in doing so, some of the areas that priority was given were the key policy issues that are in line with the current government, and some of these are the free education policy, the implementation of the CDF, social protection, and some of the growth enhancing programs that were announced in the 2022 budget. This picture was presented also by the Minister, but I just thought I should highlight it again, in that you will see good performance in almost all areas. The green bar, which is the actual, is showing that we are either on the dot or slightly higher with a lot of them, except the middle bar, the middle area, which is the debt service area, and that is showing you that in the 2022 budget, we had planned for debt service to the full, and actual obviously did not go to that level. But with regard to the rest of the categories of expenditure, we are reasonably on target. So the debt payment is the only area that is indicating that we spent a lot less than we had planned in 2022, and the reason was given also by the Honorable Minister, which is the debt standstill. So going into the categories of expenditure, I just thought I should just give a bit more detail on those categories of expenditure on the budget. The first one being the public service wage bill. The public service wage bill was only slightly below target by about 0.3%. And you know, the public service wage, the wage bill in general is one of the key, one of the difficult issues to predict. And this one was quite close and lower by just a small margin, and that marginal underperformance is mainly due to the delay in the recruitment process. And we all recall that we had done our recruitment of the 30,000 teachers and 11,000 health personnel and many other public service workers at a delayed date than we had initially indicated. So some of the key interventions under the public service wage bill are the recruitment of over 30,496 teachers, I think we recall that, and the over 11,200 health personnel, and over 4,500 other personnel across the public service. And these were mostly in the security area and also the agriculture sector area. And you may also recall that we had a wage award that was given to the public service workers of about 12%. And this was slightly above the inflation rate that we experienced, the average inflation rate that we experienced in 2022. And many other conditions of service were also dealt with in 2022. Other issues were the payment of some of the outstanding personnel-related arrears and also overseas allowances of up to 1.6 billion kwacha, and also the timely payment of gross salaries for service workers. In 2022, you will not hear of a month when civil servants were paid later than the pay date. I think this was done right on time and everybody got paid. If there's one or two that was not paid, it is because of the normal administrative issues that we all go through. An account number is perhaps a digit is missing, a name is misspelled, and the commercial bank has withheld money in the suspense account and stuff like that. But right on the pay date, 2022 was a year when everybody was paid, and the gross payments, not the net payments that we may have seen in some other years. With regard to goods and services, 13 billion kwacha was disbursed, and this was above target by about 23%. And I will explain why in a short while, but some of the notable issues in that area were the payments for procuring of medicines, and this was also on target, slightly above target in fact, and also the disbursement of funds to undertake the 2022 census of housing and population, and also general government operations were also part of that disbursement of 13 billion for goods and services. Further, debt payment, I think we've talked about this a little bit more. That was below target, obviously, for the reasons that have been given. And if I may go to the next slide, under transfers and subsidies, we are saying that about 24 billion was disbursed in total, and this was above target by almost 22%. And the overperformance is largely attributed to higher spending on FISIP. I think the Honorable Minister alluded to this. Why FISIP? FISIP is because at the time that we were planning for the program in late 2021, there are certain assumptions of prices that we had, and courtesy of the Ukraine-Russia war, the prices drastically increased, and we had to go to Parliament to ask for a supplementary budget in order to spend a little bit more on this particular program, because we had two choices. We could have only dealt with fewer farmers than we had planned for, or we could have asked for a little bit more spending on this particular item in order to cover all the farmers that we had planned for, which is approximately 1 million farmers in the country. And Parliament was gracious enough to allow us a supplementary budget on this particular line, and hence we spent a little bit more on the farmer input support program than we had originally planned. Other areas in this category is the grants to schools and hospitals, universities, and so forth. Of course, the grants to schools, which are the implementation of the free education policy. The Honorable Minister alluded to this, and that also was slightly above target, mainly because the free education policy was being implemented for the first time. And in compiling over 10,000, there are about over 10,000 schools countrywide, and in wanting to see how much each of them needed in that shorter period in terms of planning for that, we realized that we had under budgeted for a few areas of some schools and their needs and so on. So we had again to go to Parliament to ask for a slightly increment, a supplementary budget on that, to ensure that all the schools received their monies on time. And just to indicate, we have been disbursing funds to schools for the free education policy at the beginning of every quarter within the first 2 weeks. I was listening to the radio the other day, and I was hearing someone saying schools have opened and monies are not given to schools for operations and so forth. And unfortunately, at the time that we are listening to that, schools were already receiving the funds, because the Minister of Finance has issued this statement, I think, time and again, that within the first 2 weeks of the beginning of every quarter, every school will have to receive their grants. And that has been the story of 2022. And the 2023 quarter one has also followed suit in there. And we can only pray that, we can only hope that going forward, that is what will continue. So CDF, the Honorable Minister has talked to that quite sufficiently. And when we come to, and CDF was on target as well. When we come to social benefits, I think this is the category where you have payment of pension arrears, or pension obligations, issues like social cash transfers, and the food security pack, and so forth. So these areas were also on target. And just to mention that on the area of pension payments, we actually went up target. It's also one of those areas where we also had to go to Parliament to ask for a slightly more allocation on the line to ensure that we brought down the waiting time for pension payments from what it was, I think, to almost over 2.5 years to about 3 months waiting time. And that is what has happened in 2022. With regard to assets, government disbursed approximately 18 billion, 17.8 billion kwacha, which is about 11% above target. And the overperformance is mainly due to higher disbursements that we made to the road subsector, and this is for the ongoing road works that were going on in 2022, and also the payment of arrears to contractors in this particular subsector. So there is an over expenditure on the acquisition of assets, and that is mainly with regard to the road subsector. So we spent about 6.3 billion kwacha on roads in 2022, and this is about 78% above target. So this is also another area where we had asked Parliament to allow us a little bit more spending because of the need that was there at that particular time. Of course, there is still a lot more that needs to be done in that area, a lot more. But what we could afford in 2022 only took us to about 78% above what we had what Parliament had originally allowed us. Other capital projects, like the Rural Electrification Program, Millennium Challenge Account Water projects, and so forth, we had done a slight underperformance on that area, and I will indicate why, of about 8.3%. The main reason there is simply the foreign financed projects. You know, when you are making the budget, when we were making the budget for 2022, there is an assumption of the exchange rate that we had for all these dollar-based projects. And in the budget, of course, you place the kwacha value of that cost. And when you start implementing, you may implement the projects on point, but because you are now using a lower exchange rate, so it would show that you are underperforming on that, but the underperformance is simply due to exchange rate issues. And financial assets were on target as well. With regards to liabilities, the dismantling of liabilities, government disbursed close to 9 billion kwacha, which is about 72% above target. And this is also another area where we had asked Parliament to sort of allow us a little bit more allocation to ensure that we expedite or we accelerate the dismantling of arrears. And this is mainly to unlock liquidity and stimulate economic activity. So some of the areas there that we dealt with under the liabilities category was about 6.1 billion, which was paid to various suppliers of goods and services, and over 500 million kwacha, or half a billion, which was paid for personnel-related arrears, and this was mostly to retirees, and also about 1.8 billion to dismantle fuel arrears to ensure, of course, the continuous and steady supply of the commodity. So we pay off those that we are owing in order for them to continue doing the supply. And we have had a reasonably steady supply of this commodity on the market in the course of 2022. Lastly, I thought I could speak a little bit more around the financing. So financing, gross financing, which was accessed in 2022, amounted to about 39 billion kwacha against the target of 72 billion kwacha. And the breakdown of this is that for domestic financing or domestic borrowing, government accessed about 13.7 billion against a planned level of about 24.5 billion. So you could see there clearly that what we accessed in terms of domestic financing was less than what we had originally planned. So you talk about not crowding out the private sector. That is one of the reasons why we were a little bit hesitant to sort of sweep up as much as we had planned at the beginning of 2022, or before the beginning of 2022. External financing, we accessed about 25.3 billion kwacha against a target of 47 billion kwacha, and the breakdown of that is that 12.1 billion was from the special drawing rights. Remember the special drawing rights that we are also drawing on in 2023, the 1.3 billion. I think we should be able to exhaust that this year, if I'm not mistaken. Then there is also about 5.6 billion kwacha in form of disbursements for ongoing works relating to foreign finance projects. I alluded to this earlier. And also a 5.2 billion support from the World Bank and 2.4 billion from the World Bank as well for a project called Zambia Emergency Health Project, which is a project under which recurrent related spending is being done in the health sector. So the item to note is what I've mentioned, obviously, that to ensure fiscal consolidation and sustainability, government scaled down the planned borrowing from both domestic and external sources. And that's what we can see there. But then the fiscal deficit, obviously, on a cash basis, closed at a slightly higher level at about 8.1% of GDP against an initial plan of about 6.7. This might be seen as a paradox, but I will endeavor to explain that as I close. The deficit, as we are aware, is a statistic that is a net position of the inflows, which is the borrowings, and also the outflows, which is your repayment. So what you are bringing in or what you are borrowing, less what you are paying out in terms of principal payment or amortization, as we would like to call it. So the case of 2022, where you are borrowing a certain level and you are not paying out much, might give you a net position of a slightly higher level than you had planned. So that in itself might show that you did not borrow that much, but why is your deficit going up? So the reason or the answer to that is exactly what I've said. It's going up because of the debt standstill and the non-payment of external debt that we did not undertake in 2022. So it shouldn't be an issue that should worry us. It is simply an indication of what happened in 2022. So lastly, I thought I could just make a quick highlight of some of the status of some of the key budget policy issues that were pronounced in the Honorable Minister's budget, and what the status is on each of those. The first one, obviously, is the CDF, to increase the CDF to 25.7 million kwacha per constituency from the 1.6. This was achieved. The Honorable Minister has mentioned this on several occasions. And the budgetary provision was released in full. So the entire of the 25.7 per constituency was released to all, or 4 billion for all constituencies was released by end of 2022. The second item is the recruitment of 30,000 teachers, 11,200 health personnel. This was also achieved. And in fact, we managed to recruit slightly higher after we restructured our numbers around, and so that there was actually a little bit more room to add a few more personnel. And also to just report that all of these persons are on the payroll as it is now at the close of the year, and there were a few that lagged, I think less than 100 persons, but these have also been put on the payroll and they'll get paid in January. They've just been put on the payroll in the last week or so. The last few ones that remained out of all these 30,000, almost 30,500 teachers and 11,276 health personnel. The free education policy was also achieved, and there was overwhelming enrollment, obviously, as we have been getting in the media, and the grants have been released on point, like I mentioned earlier. The clearing of the backlog on pensions, this has been achieved as well. I think we brought this down to 3 months waiting time, and we are only hoping to continue going forward. The acceleration of dismantling of arrears to suppliers and contractors, this has been achieved as well. I mentioned about 9 billion that was increased, and Parliament allowed us some supplementary budget on that. And just to mention that this is an ongoing process, and the plan is to ensure that we extinguish the current arrears over a period of 5 years. The current arrears, of course, arrears is a continuous issue, as there may be 1 or 2 areas that you keep on getting a few arrears, accumulating a few more arrears if you have to. So we've got 2 things. You close the tap, but also you ensure that you mop what is leaking. So we are scaling down on the accumulation of arrears, but we are also ensuring that whatever is owed, whatever was owed at the beginning of 2022 has to be cleared 5 years from the beginning of 2022. And that is the plan that we have so far. And we only hope that we will be able to achieve that. So upscaling of social safety nets, we talked about the social cash transfer. This was achieved as well. And lastly, the budget credibility and predictability. Budget credibility speaks to minimal deviations from the approved budget, and you will see that the deviations have been quite minimal. I think we are seeing the bars that the Honorable Minister was speaking to there, and you see how very close they are between the projection and the actual. And on international circles, they tell you that if your deviation of the original budget is within 15%, then your budget is deemed to be credible. We were actually a lot less than the 15%. And the predictability aspect, which is the timely disbursement of budgeted resources, was also happening as and when requirements are done. So 2022 in general is a good success story from the budget implementation point of view, and I would like to end my submission here, and I submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director of Budget, Mr. Chipango. Copies of these presentations obviously will be made available to all of us who are here. As you were coming in, you were asked to do the registration. That is the purpose for which, one of the purposes for which the registration is meant, so that once we are done with the program, we can share with you the presentations. At this point in time, it is my honor and privilege, we are not doing very well with time, to invite the Deputy Governor Operations for the Bank of Zambia to give us a presentation, and thereafter the Commissioner General. Thank you. Dr. Chipimo, please.
Thank you very much, Chilesh. I'll just wait for the presentation to come up. So as the presentation is being prepared, my presentation will be relatively brief. This is taking into account the time constraint we have, but also more importantly, the fact that I think the Minister's presentation was quite comprehensive in terms of giving you the macroeconomic picture. And the last point is that I think we'll be having our Monetary Policy Committee meeting in a couple of weeks' time, so a fuller explanation of what we see going forward in terms of inflation and our monetary policy issues, I'm sure, will be given at that time by the Governor. So I'm going to basically cover very quickly 5 areas. I'll talk a bit about inflation, and then just adding on to what the Minister said, and then the exchange rate and the external sector, and then the interest rates, domestic credit, and end with just some comment on the stability of the financial sector. So next slide. So I think, as the Minister has indicated, really, we had seen a big drop in inflation pretty much from sort of July last year, when it had peaked at 24.6%. One of the things you see from the graph there is a big mover was what was happening on the food side. I think food had topped 30% around that time in terms of its year-on-year increase, and it's now come down quite considerably. The non-food inflation, in fact, is within our band. So we ended the year, of course, at 9.9%, but if we look at the annual average for the year as a whole, we ended 2022 at 11.2%, while this was compared to the 22.1% in 2021. So that's quite a big reduction. And the key drivers, again, the exchange rate. We also saw the dissipation of shocks relating to prices of meat and poultry products, as well as some food items there. As the Minister indicated, for this year, the challenge we have is to make sure that we can bring inflation into the 6 to 8% target band, and that is what our objective is. Next slide. This slide just gives you a bit of a breakdown for the food and non-food components. I think there are a lot of things there, so it's a bit of a busy slide. But I think if you look at the left-sided slide, which talks about the food, again, if you look at the top when it peaked in sort of Q2, Q3, 2021, the slides which reduced there, if you look at the red one relating to meat, it's just showing you that its contribution to inflation was dropping down. The yellow bars there relate to fish, and then you also have oils, which included cooking oil and so on, which reduced quite significantly over the period. And so on the food inflation side, those were the subcomponents which were really driving that reduction. The graph on the right is really just showing on the non-food side what was happening. Again, the brown columns there on housing, water, electricity, gas, that declined quite significantly, as well as the subcomponent on furnishing, household equipment, and household maintenance. And obviously, we also saw a significant drop from the highs in terms of transport contribution to inflation. So those were the basic drivers of the subcomponents of inflation. And The only other point to mention is that this relates to consumer prices. In other words, those are goods which the final goods and services which we consume. There are other important components of price pressures which feed into the costs of doing business, and we believe that the interim statistician general, they will be doing work on the producer price index, for example, as well as probably re-looking at the consumer price index itself, the basket of goods and services, because when it was actually constructed, some time has passed, the structure of the economy has changed, and the basket of goods and services we consume have also changed. So we're looking forward to the follow-on work which comes from what has been done in the census and the other work which was being done to give us a bit more information on what's happening to the consumer prices which we consume. When we look at the risks to inflation, I think the key things there we're talking about is, I think we've talked a lot in the news and elsewhere about what is happening in the rest of the world. We are seeing the US tightening monetary policy quite significantly. There are still debates about how high interest rates will go, but inflation is still high in the US, around 6 or above 6%, so monetary policy is still tightening. Now this has implications for us, largely working through the exchange rate. We see capital flows, people investing back in the US, that affects the US dollar. That also affects commodity prices and other prices, commodities which are priced in dollars and demand. But then we also have, it affects investment as the cost of financing goes up. So this is a challenge for many emerging countries, and really we're no exception. So the tightening global financial conditions are a significant issue. We also, of course, have the issue of Ukraine and the continuation of that war and the continuation of uncertainty in terms of how it will be resolved. All of these things impact economic activity. The third issue is really around COVID. I think we are seeing increasing numbers now. I know many of you in your businesses, certainly for us at the bank, we are seeing more cases being reported of COVID, positive COVID cases. So clearly, this is something which we need to remain extremely vigilant about. I don't think any of us really want to go back to the restrictive policies which were required in the past, as these have a very, very devastating impact on obviously business activity. But this is something which we must manage, and I think if we all follow the basic rules which we have been guided on, it helps minimizing the costs of dealing with the pandemic. I think the other two issues really around maize prices and what's happening in the agricultural sector. Of course, this is a big driver of food inflation in Zambia, and so, you know, the issues of how the maize market works and what happens with the forthcoming maize season is something which we're keeping an eye on and will be very important. And we're also seeing, of course, that regionally maize prices are a bit higher, and obviously that does drive, has an impact on prices here as well. And the last point we're looking at really in terms of the risks to inflation are around energy costs. I think everybody understands what's happening now with energy demand. I think the minister articulated very well the big picture there and what needs to be done to get more energy supplied. But obviously, higher energy costs will feed into inflation and business activity. So that's something else which we see as risks to inflation. But as I indicated, the governor will be having our MPC meeting in a couple of weeks, and there will be a fuller explanation of how we see these things impacting on inflation going forward. On the exchange rate, as I've indicated, this has been an important driver of inflation coming down. I think the red bar is the one which represents the Kwacha US dollar. I think this is really the main transactional foreign currency which we use here. A general point, if you put a trend line in that, it will be downwards, but what you see is for the red bar from September, there was some uptick in the Kwacha US dollar rate. Generally speaking, for the year, the Kwacha really on an average annual basis, it averaged 16.91 Kwacha to a US dollar. This compares to 19.9 in 2021. Chungu, you can leave it on the chart. And so this was a 15.1% appreciation, and this fed into the overall improvement in inflation, as I've already indicated. But in terms of what's happened more recently from September, I think we saw pressures really arising from fertilizer demand, fuel demand, and then we also saw some higher than normal pressures in terms of the need to purchase drugs. So all of these things, if you add them to the typical seasonality of the end of year, Christmas and so on, has really been fueling demand in the foreign exchange market. And we do also track outstanding demand from the banking sector, and you saw this also increase quite significantly. Now, this was also made worse really by the fact that from really sort of July, August, we saw a significant drop in supply from the mining sector as well. And so you were facing higher demand, again, coupled with lower supply from the mining sector. And I think already mention has been made in the second half of the year about issues with production and prices. Over the first half of the year, mining sector, certainly mining sector taxes paid had been quite high, and we saw that supply being quite good, and that was really what underwrote the appreciation of the exchange rate, and the minister had indicated it had come down to about 15.8 kwacha. The next slide. So this slide just tries to present what are the sort of key sectors, which sort of impact on demand and supply, and this is for the year as a whole, so speaks to the average annual movement